Hello everybody, welcome back to ComedIan MTG. My name is Ian. We are breaking down the final Webcam cEDH event for Tier1Con. This was the last tournament held by Tier1Con over Webcam before their large event coming this summer. They're having an event in Denmark for Tier1 MTG. It is going to be on a supposedly Grand Prix scale, so it should be really interesting, and they're offering some pretty amazing stuff, including if 250 people participate in the main cEDH event, the winner will be receiving an unlimited time twister, and some of the other players will be also receiving some unlimited duels. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff up on the line for that tournament in Denmark. But back to this most recent tournament, we had the last of our Webcam tournaments. Let's break down the top 4 of that event right now. So something interesting that happened with this top 4, one of our top 4 finalists unfortunately had to step down due to some time conflicts. And that top 4 finalist was Deke with Malcolm, Timna, Doomsday. Now this is a very interesting list. Not only did this list make the top 4, but a second copy of this exact same 100 cards also made the top 13 of this event. So clearly a list that is putting up good results in this tournament, and the fact that 2 completely separate pilots playing this list made the top 13 with this exact list is really interesting. And I think this is a very cool list, a very spicy deck. Let's break it down right now. It is playing probably my favorite partner combination in Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator and Timna the Weaver. I have said for a while now that despite the fact that the Esper colors are not being the most heavily benefited in the current moment, that it's probably the most powerful combination of partner commanders. I'm feeling pretty confident about that. Malcolm generates value as far as mana wise, and Timna generates value as far as cards, and that's literally everything you need. So I think it's a super strong combination. As you can tell by the Doomsday name, this is a deck attempting to resolve a Doomsday. Still running ad nauseum, still able to win in that way. Just checking here, there is no Angel's Grace, so definitely not taking advantage of that Esper option. But definitely playing some interesting cards like Hapless Researcher, which most people would recognize from some of the Hulk piles way back in the day. Interesting to see that not there. But there's Laboratory Maniac, Thassa's Oracle, your Doomsday piles. A lot of people will recognize Gush from the classic Doomsday piles. For those of you who don't know, Doomsday is a card for 3 black mana sorcery. It allows you to search your library and graveyard for 5 cards, put them any way you want. You lose half of your life, and everything else is thrown into exile. Whole point is to resolve a Doomsday, usually crack the pile immediately, and by that I mean drawing one of the cards, and from there you should be able to put together a combination of cards that just wins you the game on the spot. So, as I mentioned, cards like Gush and cards like Hapless Researcher kind of help you to set those things together. A lot of these piles involve Lion's Eye Diamond, and basically playing something like a Lion's Eye Diamond on that first draw, or getting that Gush, which allows you to get 2 cards deeper for almost no mana most of the time. It's interesting to see Doomsday make a comeback. I've been looking at lists lately that have been playing Doomsday and think that there's a chance that it is just a little slept on. The fact that, once again, I think you get to play some of the most powerful commanders in the game right now is a pretty nice incentive, and it's not just the same stuff we've been seeing all the time, so that's pretty cool too. A lot of hype lately about Bolas' Citadel. I think it's a great card. How it compares to other cards that are payoffs in the format right now, hard to say. I tend to personally like it more than Peer into the Abyss in certain lists, but it really depends on what you're trying to do with your decks. So, very interesting deck, very cool card. Not technically in the top 4, but a deck that earned a top 4 spot, and a deck that has 2 copies in the top 13. So this list is one I'd be looking out for going forward. I personally might sleeve it up because it's pretty cool. It plays reasonably aggressively, but also has a really nice grind game due to the commanders and due to Doomsday kind of just being able to win out of nowhere. So I'm really excited that this deck exists, and glad to see that it made the top 4, technically, in this tournament. First, from our real top 4, Tremnick with Blue Farm. This is Blue Farm. I mean, it is as Blue Farm can be. There is not a ton of spice here. It is just a classic Blue Farm list, trying to play some of the best stuff in the format. For those of you unfamiliar with the basic concept of Blue Farm, it is a turbo ad nauseum strategy, but also subsidized by the fact that you have Tymna in the command zone. The word farm sort of originates from Tymna and Bruce back in the day. It's sort of lost a bit of its meaning in cEDH in the current time, but Blue Farm is actually one of the most accurate to farm decks available at this time, so it is a classic farm deck in that sense. The idea basically is to get some of these really interesting creatures down, to be able to accrue some value. Ranger Captain of Eos is actually starting to see a lot of play in these Blue Farm lists, just because one, it can grab a Hope of Gearper, and then for 3 mana, and then 1 more mana. So for 4 mana, you are grabbing 2 silence effects. And when you're playing a card like Ad Nauseam that can win at sorcery speed, that's a really, really powerful effect to have. Just sort of a thing to point out in general about Blue Farm's most recent updates, which also tends to work really well with Savine's Reclamation. So having a Ranger Captain be able to sack it, maybe defensively get it back so you can use it proactively, that's a really cool situation to be in. This is probably the least amount of 1-drops I've seen in a Blue Farm list as of late. Very surprised to see it on Culling the Week with 2 commanders and only 9 creatures, and one of those creatures will literally never see the board. I say literally, but I have at many times hard cast a Simian Spirit Guide in desperation. But as I said, there's a pretty classic Blue Farm list, not much to write home about, but clearly just good enough to get into the top 4. One card I will point out is the inclusion of Toxic Deluge. I think we are at a point in the meta where things are so swingy that either you are A, going as fast as possible, or B, in a situation where you need something like a Toxic Deluge to be able to wipe the board. I actually did have the record to make the top 13 in this tournament, but lost out on breakers, and Toxic Deluge was a card that won me a couple games and almost won me another game, just because of the fact that there would be stacks players who basically seemed like they had the entire board locked down, and you would be able to wipe and then get it back to your turn and be able to win. So very interesting to see Deluge here. I really think it's a positive include. There are just situations where you're like, yeah, sometimes I do have to pay like 8, 9, 10 life, but it's either that or concede the game. And obviously Cyclonic Rift helps in these situations as well, but having your opponents be unable to replay their stuff easily without reanimation definitely has an impact. Also, the difference between paying 3 mana for something and 7 mana is pretty huge. So speaking of Blue Farm, Kolkio is here with Blue Farm. His version being called Blue, just blue. It is a Blue Farm deck. Now, differences here, you'll see Serra Ascendant and Sidisi's Faithful as 1-drops instead of Hope of Gearper. No Hope of Gearper in the entire list. So Ranger Captain able to grab Sidisi's Faithful, which is a pretty spicy line. I've been seeing a lot of people talk about that. Sidisi's Faithful is basically a creature bounce effect. It comes in, you sack something, and then you return a creature to its owner's hand. Now, the interesting part about this is that it gets around things that hate on non-creatures. So it gets around Thalia effects, it gets around something like a Deafening Silence because it only counts as a creature for turn, and it can bounce your dockside and stuff like that. It's an interesting card. I'm interested that it is seeing more play. I don't love that it doesn't hit anything but creatures, but if you're looking to play like an unsummoned effect, I don't hate the fact that it is one that can get around certain effects. Other cards of note, Snapback, which is a free bounce effect for creatures. So Kolkio clearly favoring these bounce effects in the list over other effects. I noticed a lot of people in the Roger Silas Discord were talking about Rushing River. It's a very interesting card. So you can bounce any permanent, and if you sack a land, you can copy it. So when you're in these types of situations with like Turbo Ad Nauseam decks, end step being able to bounce 2 stacks effects that are like really holding you down seem very, very strong. I have been hesitant to play it up to this point, but Kolkio slamming it into their deck. I know Coco Loco has been talking about this card very highly. So there's a lot of people who are really interested in throwing that card in. Apart from that, we have just another Blue Farm list here. This is actually very interesting because this is the first time we've seen Blue Farm actually do well at these tables since the Flash ban. A lot of the community has just sort of been under the impression that Blue Farm is the best deck in the format, and yet we haven't had any hard tournament-based proof of that. So it's very interesting to see 2 copies of Blue Farm making it to the top pods in this tournament, basically showing that, yeah, this deck is here ready to put a lot of pressure on the game. Now, a lot of that can probably be held up to the fact that sometimes people don't like playing the best deck in the format, or sometimes people pick up the best deck in the format without knowing how to play it the most effectively. So interesting to see now in this tournament 2 copies of Blue Farm. I'm interested to see how the deck does going forward, whether this was a one-time thing or if we should be expecting this type of thing from now on. The Queen of Combat, a Negela deck by Legit Vocals. You may recognize Legit Vocals as they have been on this top 4 report before. Now, we do not have Kodama Timna today from Legit. We do have Negela the Blade Blossom though. Negela, this is an interesting Negela list. It is closer to the mid-range versions of Negela. If you'll notice, there are no copies of Ad Nauseam in this list, so obviously it is not a Turbo Nas version of Negela. It has some interesting includes. It has Wandering Archaic, which I absolutely love that it's including in this list. Fantastic. I'm a huge fan of Wandering Archaic, as anyone may know at this point, but Wandering Archaic is a really, really strong card and very interesting. Love to see it seeing play here. We have Hull Breacher, which is also very interesting in this list because if you look down here at the sorceries, there's no wheels. So this is strictly a defensive Hull Breacher, which, given the current meta, given how strong draw effects are, given the amount of times you see wheel effects in our format, and given the amount of times you see people playing Peer into the Abyss, I really don't hate just having it as a defensive creature. Fire Covenant here, fantastic card if you can be able to play it. If you're not using your life total as a consistent resource, Fire Covenant is absolutely a house. It can be a one-sided board wipe, and in a deck like Negela, where you want to clear the board and you don't want to hurt your own board state, perfect for this list. Basically a lot of the conversation we had earlier about Toxic Deluge, but in Negela, when your board state matters, it's a great way to make that a one-sided version of it. Now, one of the spiciest inclusions in this list is Plarg, Dean of Chaos / Augusta, Dean of Order. Now, if I am correct here, if you have 5 mana of creatures, like 5 mana of creatures that tap for mana, and you notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The backside of Plarg, the backside of Plarg actually acts as an infinite combat outlet with Negela. So that's pretty interesting. I wonder how often that will actually be the case. Your creatures getting vigilance is pretty interesting. Your creatures getting buffed is also pretty interesting. And then being able to either A, give them more toughness, or B, give them more power is a unique effect. It would not be my instinct to include a card like this, and I'd love to hear Legit and their reasoning behind this inclusion. Legit, if you do watch this video, comment down below. We'd love to hear it. One other card I'd like to point out as an include is Stifle. I remember when I was playing Fibblethip for a while, this was 3 or 4 months ago, but I was saying a lot of the effects in the format kind of just get pantsed by Stifle, especially if you're looking at some of the more permanent based combos. A lot of people, once those combos have at least resolved, if they don't have the right removal spell, can't stop a permanent based combo. Stifle tends to stop those. It stops storm triggers, which is pretty interesting. It stops Thassa's Oracle enter the battlefield. It stops Docksides enter the battlefield. It stops any enter the battlefield. I don't know how often this effect is worth it, but is a 1 mana preventative effect, and there have to be times where that can really come in handy. So interesting to see it included, especially included in a 5-color deck that has literally every card as an option. To summarize about this list, mid-range Negela list, nothing too crazy, but a solid list looking to grind away to victory. And finally, our player that took down the entire tournament, Maraxis with Maraxis Underworld Chain. Very interestingly, this is the player that actually replaced Deke. So the way that replacement ended up working was they took the player who had not qualified for the top 4, who had the best record in the regular rounds, in the Swiss rounds, and they put that player in. So Maraxis was undefeated during the Swiss, and Legit Vocals was the only other undefeated person. Therefore, by the time time they jumped over to the top 4. Maraxis ended up, as I said, being the only undefeated person that wasn't already there, and therefore was able to take Deke's spot in the top 4. Now, I know the tournament organizers really slaved over that decision, and I think given a really, really tough situation where you can only let one player in, I think they actually made the best decision possible. I think going with the player who'd performed best in that day really shows that they're at least considering the options available, and it at least shows that they're rewarding players who have played well in that day. So players may recognize this list as the list being worked on by Pongo and Killstars. This is a first sliver list hybridized with Underworld Breach packages. It's a very unique list. I'm glad to see it consistently seeing play now, because as I mentioned, I think this is a great direction for the first sliver decks to be going in, using the fact that there are 5 color options to add more combos in the deck and open up different avenues, as Food Chain definitely has certain issues that it can't get through. So very interested to see it here. This version is running all 3 exile outlets, which I know some of the other version of the Underworld sliver lists were only running Squee and Eternal Scourge, and actually ended up cutting Mistala Griffin. Also running Extract, which I know the other versions had cut as well, at least for some time. Now, the main win conditions in the deck are obviously the classic Food Chain. You get one of these Food Chain outlets, exile them infinitely, cast them from exile, make infinite creature mana, and then you're able to cast your deck by cascading with the first sliver. Or, as I mentioned, they have the Underworld Breach package, so being able to Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze. Intuition is in the list, and because you have access to Savine's Reclamation. And then, apart from that, it is almost everything you would expect from a list trying to go off with Food Chain, and a list trying to go off with Underworld Breach. A lot of the classic interaction pieces, some things to grab creatures, and the full Underworld Breach package. Running Ad Nauseam as well, because the Breach and Ad Naus packages tend to layer very well together. I'm also very interested to see such a proactive list playing some of the 2 mana interaction, which a lot of people have considered to be a little outdated in the format right now, just because holding up 2 mana is a lot tougher in times like this. I'm wondering if maybe that has a part in why Maraxis was able to grab the top spot in today's tournament. And as I mentioned before, very happy to see the Underworld Sliver list seeing more love. I think it is one of the better innovations in the format in a long time. I love the idea that we took a list that was a mainstay staple for a while, started to fall really out of favor due to the current meta, and then gave it juice to allow it to play in the current meta. I think that's a fantastic move from some great members of the community, and I love to see it doing well in this tournament here. And that concludes our top 4 from the Tier 1 Con. Don't leave yet, because we have a few things to talk about. 1, as I mentioned, August will be the live Denmark Tier 1 Con full event. You can check out more information at the Tier 1 website, which I will put a link for in the show notes down below. If you want to see more content like this, you're here on YouTube and you want to see more top 4 breakdowns, which are, I mentioned to someone the other day, some of my favorite videos to create. Please hit like and hit subscribe if you want to find more videos like this, and if you want to see anytime we release new videos, hit that little bell icon next to it. And if you're feeling extra generous, please go and check out our Patreon at patreon.com/ComedIanMTG. Any help is super valuable and it helps the channel a ton. My patrons are the reason I'm able to continually have my editing software. They are the reasons I was able to get a new computer to produce these videos, and it's been super helpful. One thing we have going on right now is our Brutal Combat competition. We are brewing around Scion of the Ur-Dragon and making so that the game plan involves one of the new Elder Dragons from Strixhaven. The details for this competition can be found in the ComedIan MTG Discord, which I will once again link down below. The winner of that competition and the deck list I pick will end up being played on the channel against 3 meta decks, and that'll be really fun. Hoping to do more of these brewing competitions as time goes on as well. All right, everybody, have an amazing week. Peace.